Tony, thanks for joining.
Nice to see you, Dan.
It was great to be over and see the projects you're working on, to get a little glimpse into the process. You turned on an installation that was a big smiley face, then it had screens for the eyes and mouth.
I started with these kind of caricatures, and around the time my son was born, I challenged myself to do something positive and humorous and optimistic because a lot of my work is fairly critical and on the dark side, even though there's humor in it. And I started thinking about digital space because the internet was fairly young then and everything was a bit optimistic. And so I heard also about these kids in Asia who were feeding these pets online digitally. And one thing led to another, looking at Ball's inspirational smiley face. And I started to design these creatures which were projected somewhere in between the Venus of Willendorf and the smiley face. And they're kind of proto emojis, actually. And the smiley face that you saw here comes out of that series, but started in 2004. So,
So, in general, influences for your work, there's paranormal things, aliens. You and I met at the warehouse that I work at. I think you're preparing stuff for this show, for the Tokyo show. We're looking for some sculptures. There's a ghost, and I think there's an alien head. I was immediately, I feel like I connected immediately, and I'm like, yeah, that is interesting. What's going on there?
yeah, I guess I associated surrealism and the subconscious mind with these fringe imagery and the way the subconscious mind is sort of enacted in popular culture and how it functions in terms of organizing people's worldviews. And they come from long standing interest in belief systems. I mean, I grew up Catholic, so right there, you're in the midst of heaven, hell, spirits that you can't see, the mysterious Trinity and limbo and all these kind of concepts at a very young age. And there's no way to verify any of this. So you're constantly shifting in a developing mind between reality and these kind of social or mental constructs. And that's always stuck with me. People say, like, oh, well, what do you think about religion or that? And I think it taught me to understand belief systems, which I still apply to pretty much everything. And a lot of the work kind of sifts out in that way, although I wasn't able to really articulate the notion of beliefs until maybe 15 years ago, but it's been in the work here and there straight through.
So you might approach the belief in aliens or the belief in paranormal things in the same way that you approach belief in religion or religious systems.
Yeah, there's no difference really. It's just what my work is basically a fascination with systems and why do people believe in aliens? Why do people draw constellations in the stars? These sorts of things. That's always been there. When I was a kid, I used to collect, I started recording like when I was 16 or something, ghost stories and acid trips and things like that, the psychotic breaks. And I still have some of those recordings, which I just unearthed not too long ago. So it's been since the beginning, lifting up the rock. And it turns out that rationalism has taught people to ignore these facets of society. And it's funny how the art world pretended for so many years to be very straightforward and rational, even around the practices of art, which is pretty irrational. Humans strive for meaning, significance, patterns that they want to fit into. I mean, that's pretty much how people get to the default network, I guess.
There is something fascinating about the way in which there's this cultural obsession with aliens. Maybe it's a hope or desire for some guidance or something like that.
Yeah, and transcendence, and some have theorized it's even a replacement for the divine divinity for atheists. It's kind of
Yeah.
reapplying, yeah, rationalism to that. But I like Carl Jung's perspective on it.
There was an article recently in the New York Times about your collection of occult paraphernalia.
It often gets grouped into a cult, but it's pretty wide ranging because UFO is not really a cult unless you take the root word of hidden or something. But a lot of it has to do with cults, which I haven't really done that much work around. I mean, I did a talking light in the 90s. I don't know if you ever saw those. It's the system that I designed to use a circuit to pulse a light bulb with a voice or any kind of sound. So it's like a sound light organ, but purposed for talking light. And it comes out of a funny story because I think my grandfather believed that he told my father that when lights flickered, that somebody was trying to send him a message. And I must have heard that story when I was 5 years old or something. And I didn't really think much about it till I designed this talking light, which came from more of an idea of minimalism, taking media art and applying a minimalist aesthetic to it, like my friend Tony Conrad and the Flickr film. And I thought, well, let's go a step further and say in the digital age, one pixel connected to sound, and the pixel is modified by the language in some way. So it gets brighter the louder the sound is, and dims the less it is, and follows the pattern, the syntax of the voice.
So you speak to it and it changes.
Well, I record a voice, a text, a script, and play it back through the machine that I've designed, and then use it in a lamppost or hang it in a gallery or something or like that. And so it's kind of also one of the smaller pieces, but it affects a huge area if you think about the light covering. One of the first ones I did was reading a lot about Jonestown massacre and the thinking that goes behind that, this kind of leap of faith and what brings somebody from being a rational individual to somebody who decides to drink the Kool-Aid to get on a comet, like the Hale-Bopp Heaven's Gate group, or drink the Kool-Aid with, I mean, they're always drinking Kool-Aid. Why? But you know, anyway, but so it kind of worked with some psychological texts.
I blame the Kool-Aid man.
Yeah.
I knew he was no good.
Yeah,
So your grandfather was Fulton Oursler, the writer.
that's right.
You mentioned he was friends with Arthur Conan Doyle and Harry Houdini, and he was debunking, would you call them spiritualists or fake conjurers of spirits?
Yeah, which is interesting because as I was working on the Imponderable film, which comes out of that dynamic, first did a book called Imponderable, and it's a like 1,200 images from my collection that I organized in 10 essays by scholars around the work. And this was done by Luma Foundation and published by Ringier. And hopefully that's going to come back out. I can't say where yet, but it'll come out. It's published twice. Anyway, but Luma first put the book out, then Maya Hoffman and her generosity also helped me produce a story that came out of the archive. And the archive, just to jump back, I mean, I've been collecting this kind of material for a long time, and it was generally collected for my projects through the years, and also for pleasure and just visual interest and so forth, and a kind of a hobby. It was kind of private, and then the book came out thanks to Luma that made it public, and then they challenged me to come up with a story or something out of it, an art project out of that, which I had been doing my whole adult life, basically, but secretly. And then there was a more overt relationship to this material. And I picked out the story that you're kind of talking about there with Arthur Conan Doyle, Harry Houdini, my grandfather, who was a writer, a mystery writer, magician, also then a religious convert. He wrote the greatest story ever told, too, later in his life. So he had these different points of ascendancy or bites of the apple or so forth. And his wife, my grandmother, Grace Perkins, is also part of the story. She was a writer, wrote like, I don't know, more than 70 books, many of which were made into Hollywood movies. Pre-Code, particularly Night Nurse, was one of her pieces that she did, which I highly suggest people check out. And you mentioned that there was a debunking interest by my grandfather. And people have to understand that spiritualism and psychics sort of had much more oomph in society, much more power in society in an earlier age. Women had just gotten the vote. Film was just beginning. So it was a different era. And there was a lot of death because of the Spanish flu, World War I, World War II coming. And people were really vulnerable to psychics and the belief in psychics and losing faith in classical religion and stuff. So in that context, the debunking makes sense. It's not random attacks on people who believe in alternative means of ascension or something. And so Harry Houdini kind of incorporated that into his acts. So he would present these magic shows, and part of it would be in the town he went to. He would invite the local psychic who he had secretly explored all of his tricks in advance, sent spies in to learn about him, and then debunk the guy publicly by offering it like $10,000, which would have been $1 million or something today. So that's the background. But Arthur Conan Doyle, mystery writer, my grandfather was younger than these guys, so he idolized them, both Houdini and Conan Doyle. And Conan Doyle and Houdini knew each other. Of course, Conan Doyle gave us the rational detective of the enduring Sherlock Holmes. But in his personal life, he lost, I think, one or two sons. He lost a huge amount of family members to disease and etc. all at once. There tend to be some magical thinking in his family. You know, his father was in a mental institution most of his life. There was substance abuse and so forth. But his father was a great artist too. If you check out his fairy paintings, they're kind of proto-surrealist stuff. They're incredible. But anyway, so Arthur Conan Doyle became a spiritualist, but heavily, and promoted it and used his fame as an author for this rational detective to promote the most irrational stuff, which he did promote to my grandfather. So he would send pictures of the Cottingley fairies to my grandfather and say, like, here's the evidence, Fulton. What do you think? And so I grew up going into the basement. You know, I had my chemistry set over there, and then over there were all these files from my dead grandfather. And occasionally my parents would say, like, oh, you want to see the fairy picture? He pulled out a Cottingley fairy photo, which drove me and my sister, Teresa, completely wild. So they could be roaming around in the backyard. Anyway, the long and the short of it is that there was a famous case that involved Conan Doyle, Houdini, a psychic from Boston by the name of Marjorie Crandon, who had an ectoplasmic hand that emanated from her crotch. And she also often performed nude with glow in the dark paint on her body, and was an all around, I think of her really as a kind of folk surrealist. She did a lot of things that surrealists did at the time of surrealism, but since there wasn't probably an opportunity for her to be an artist or something, She did it in her own way. She did collage, she did trance text, she did performative photography, and did a lot of performance and audio work and stuff like that. So I built this kind of project out of the dynamic between all those characters, and it's all about decline of classical religion and the rise of alternative culture. And that became the Imponderable Film Project, which I'm going to be showing in Tokyo, a version of it, which is a feature-length film shown in a Pepper's Ghost. The characters are as accurate to the best of my ability as they can be. You go into this dark room theater, see this. People don't know what a Pepper's Ghost is. It's basically when you look out a window at night, you see your reflection in the window, but you can see right through it to whatever's happening outside on the street. So you get like this live double exposure. Well, that's a Pepper's Ghost. And that's the way the screen is in the movie that I made around this, where these characters all kind of interact in the 20s. And it's all kind of centered around Scientific America offered a pretty big reward for anybody who could demonstrate scientifically any kind of paranormal activity. Marjorie Crandon, the Witch of Beacon Hill, as they called her, tried to get the prize, and she attempted to ring a bell with her mind alone. And so there were all these judges around, and she was trying to do it, and she did do it, but then it was seen to be fraudulent because she had people in the room helping her, et cetera. And then Harry Houdini, who was on the judging committee, designed this box to put her inside it, which is just one of the most medieval, kind of parallel to the witch hunt and so forth around it. That's the kind of climax of the movie. Just to wind up, sorry it's taken so long, but it was exhibited with an archive of photographs, books, letters, and things like that around the 5 or 7 main characters in the movie, called Imponderable, and which the book is also called Imponderable. But so you see, you could go in and watch some of the movie and walk out, or watch the whole movie, and you'd be like, this is completely insane. There's ectoplasm coming out of this woman's crotch, and there's a belief, she believes that she's speaking to her dead brother. And then there's Arthur Conan Doyle, who believes in these little girls who took pictures of fairies. And then there's Harry Houdini, who's performing naked and escaping from these handcuffs. And the story is hard to believe, but then when you see the archive, you see the photograph of Marjorie Crandon with the teleplasmic hand coming out of her crotch. You see Fulton Oursler's book of the greatest story ever told. You see Harry Houdini naked with locks kind of hanging off his body and so forth. Stuart Comer at MoMA, when we showed the film at MoMA, we organized the archive to be exactly around the characters in the film. And that was a kind of breakthrough moment for me on that, because if you moved from the so-called fictional space to the documentary space, they informed each other in some really fantastical way that just cross-fired the brain to just come up with new patterns.
I hope you show it again in New York or in the States. I'd love to see it. Have you done other work that's narrative like that?
Well, that's interesting, because that was my big return to narrative for me, because a lot of the work I do is kind of fractured narrative, and did a lot of writing for the Dolls and Dummies and for other installations where they're language, but it's fragmented, and it's meant to be put together by the viewer or the participant. I kind of stayed away from classical narrative because I thought it's too constricting. And also, I've got a belief that narrative is not really the way we think. It's a social construct that's more based on marketing than it is the way we think. I look at people like Burroughs and Brian Geisen and these kind of fractured texts I can relate to more than Then the Sun Came Up Then I walk through the door out to the street. Nothing is like that. People are daydreaming all throughout the day. The way information combines in our minds is definitely kaleidoscopic, and then we draw meaning out of it. And it's nonlinear for sure. So I've always had a problem with classical narrative, and but the imponderable, it's such a crazy idea that I loved taking that such a fragmented thing and letting the narrative tell itself kind of the opposite, where the fragmentation becomes crystallized in the narrative.
I've been reading Proust lately. I think that that's the closest in terms of the media that I've absorbed to being actually how we think and how consciousness is. It is a narrative, not really. One sentence is like 3 pages, and you're like, wait, what's even going on? I don't know. What is there a story or what?
Which one are you, what are you,
Just the first one, Swan's Way. Have you read those?
some of them, but years ago. Fantastic. Did you see that his notebooks at Morgan
Oh, I
Library?
wish I had. I wish I
Yeah,
had.
that was cool. They had a little exhibition of his notebooks there.
I want to circle back really quick to what you said about narrative being a product. When I see your work, I really enjoy that it is a tangible thing, but that it seems very much like a process. I mean, it's a product, it's a thing, but I can see that it's not just this product. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of thought and conscious effort in going into it and a lot of experimentation. And it's kind of an anti-product in a sense.
Yeah, well, if you're talking about the economic side of it or more of a conceptual side, I think maybe what you're sensing is that it's incomplete in, in a profound sense, that they're intended to be an open conversation. So if there's a egg shape with knives stuck into it, sitting on the floor over there with the projector projecting a face into it, and so it has this sort of voodoo effect to the media with these knives penetrating a virtual face, which becomes three-dimensional. I mean, it falls apart and comes back together, and there's a willing suspension of disbelief in operation with all art. I always love that people say, "Oh yeah, that painting." Every time I look at it, it's I notice different things about it. But what you're actually noticing is that your brain is different. The painting is exactly the same. It's not changing. It might be changing on some tiny microscopic level over geological time or something, but it's you. And I'm well aware of that. There's a kind of fluctuation, and that's where the viewer is. And the work has that built in somehow.
Yeah, the movement. But also, it seems improbable on some level. I had this thought, and I was really thinking about your work over the last couple of days leading up to this conversation. There's a quality that seems almost utopian or something. You're expressing these things in the culture that need to be expressed, the fears, the hopes, anxieties that might manifest themselves through aliens or paranormal, other phenomena, things like that. But yet the objects themselves seem very free, and there's video and there's sculpture and they're painting and they're printed and they're just these objects that are very difficult to pin down. I guess that's why I say anti-product, because generally when you see art, you kind of know what you're getting. It's a sculpture, it's this. We want to do that. We want to compartmentalize and say it's this, it's definitely a sculpture or it's a painting or it's a video or something. And your work is kind of all that at once.
But it doesn't stay the same, maybe is what you're sensing. But yeah, I like the utopian side of it, because that's my dream, is to, when the work is sort of loaded up, I hope for people to really dream with the work in some way. It's supposed to be a provoker of creativity in one way or another, whether it's a challenge or a lot of the outdoor work projection into public spaces or into nature takes advantage of that. One of the things that Newton talks about how like light is absorbed into an object and the color that's not absorbed is reflected back. And that's how we see the object.
Basically, the object is every other color but the color because it's
Yeah,
reflected back, right?
kind of. Yeah, yeah. That's a nice way of putting it. Exactly. And then, so with projection, you're interrupting that harkens back to Max Ernst and Freudelage stuff where he's Rorschach and these kind of images that I've been obsessed with over the years where there's this great scientific discoveries about grain and the amygdala and hallucinating in grain and attempting to see sort of pareidolia, seeing faces and patterns and things like that, non-pharmaceutical hallucinations. And that I felt like has become a bigger part of the outdoor projects that I've done over the years that where I'm fascinated by how liquid the images become and how they must be completely different for each person who looks at it.
And different for the person when they come back and see it again, right?
Well, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Or from moment to moment, both them and the piece.
Yeah, and it's not even the image I made. And I'm well aware of that because if you looked at some of the imagery on a computer screen, all the magic's gone. So I've learned that what works in certain visual situations. It's a kind of strange niche, this outdoor projection.
So, how might you start a project? Maybe you could walk us through the process of making a piece from the start.
That's a great question. For example, I stumbled upon this character in upstate New York called the Cardiff Giant. And it was one of the biggest hoax in American history. And in a nutshell, I won't go too long-winded on it, but a tobacco farmer and a preacher met in a social situation, and the tobacco farmer, kind of well-to-do guy, and the preacher was very biblical literalist, down to the point where he believed in these things called Nephilim, which you might know, there were these fallen angels who ended up on Earth because they wanted to mate with humans. And so they left like 100 or so of them, 300 or whatever, came to the Earth, did mate with women, and gave birth to Nephilim, which were approximately 10 foot 4 inches tall, giants. And they wandered the Earth, did all sorts of stuff. They introduced seduction through makeup, supposedly. They introduced hidden technologies that shouldn't have been introduced to Earth. They also ate much of the food that humans were eating. And so then after they ate all the food, they started eating humans. People started praying to God to help with these Nephilim and get rid of them. And then God caused the flood to occur and kill the Nephilim. And there was some kind of crazy battle that they had amongst themselves. And supposedly that was the great flood, cleansed the earth. But some people believe actually that the Nephilim still exists today, that they had these technologies and so forth, and some of their DNA is there or they're hidden somewhere. But I came across this argument and the hoax between the tobacco farmer and the biblical literalist. And the tobacco farmer got so pissed off that he hatched a plot after talking to this preacher. He thought he was such an idiot for believing in giants. And the nascent theory of evolution was like 10 years old. This took place in 1865, something like that. So the tobacco farmer believed in evolution, dinosaurs, etc. People were actually taking these dinosaur bones. This goes back thousands of years, and rearranging these dinosaur bones to depict humans. So there's a kind of tradition to this notion of the giant. Anyway, the tobacco farmer goes to Iowa, digs up a giant block of stone, takes it to Chicago under secrecy. He hires a stone cutter, makes a giant stone figure of a petrified Nephilim. And petrification was a kind of new thing, too. Anyway, so he brings the giant under cover of night in a wagon to upstate New York, buries it. It stays underground for 1 year in one of his co-conspirators' farms. And then, as per plan, they hire somebody to dig a well and direct them to dig in that exact spot where the giant's been underground for a year. And they go down and they get down and they hit this rock and they see a foot, and then they unearth this giant figure, pull it out, and it becomes just an enormous sensation in upstate New York. Thousands of people are coming, they're paying big bucks to see this giant. There's all sorts of theories about where it came from. One thing leads to another, and finally, the great showman P.T. Barnum tries to buy it. He can't buy it, so he decides to make his own. And he makes his own, and then there's two Cardiff giants floating around. And then there's lawsuits. Finally, the guy who perpetrated this Nephilim hoax was revealed because money was seen to be traced to him, and people remembered a box arriving in upstate New York and blah, blah, blah. So it's seen as this kind of, in my eyes, a very now kind of thing, in the sense that there's this great biblical figure, that is floating around, which is a kind of hoax, but also important symbolically to people. And the Cardiff Giant now lives in upstate New York, the Farmers Museum in Cooperstown, where the Hall of Fame, Baseball Hall of Fame is. And that's where I saw it. My brother lives up there. I just couldn't believe the story was a inspiration. So I started thinking about it. I took scans of it with my phone. I have a program to scan by using the phone. Decided I would make one and made it, did more research on the topic and developed it further and further. The imagery, scripts, AI, it all comes out of this research I used to develop the work. But I guess that was more long-winded than I thought it would be. But
So you might start with a certain story or some idea that you're
yeah,
fascinated with, and then from the story you think about it sort of materializes as an object, and then you're actually making this giant object. And I think you showed me a version of it in the studio.
yeah,
We were talking about CNC routing, and there's the whole material aspect of your work. It seems like everything has to be handmade or handcrafted or custom, right?
yeah. I'll do some stuff with found objects in the micro series that I was working on, and some other things. But I mean, the giant also is just such a great story, because this guy was trying to replicate something from from the Bible, and the object exists, so it operated as a kind of talisman for people.
The object was real. It was a real object,
Yeah,
but the story was fabricated, but the belief was real.
exactly. And then nobody knew what to believe it was. There was one guy who believed that it had come over from the Middle East in a very circuitous route. And he actually saw patterns in the skin of the giant, which nobody else could see. And I managed to find this article. It's absolutely fantastic. And he believed that the pyramid makers were the ones who made that figure, and that he was a kind of Dionysian character that died in the fall and then came back to life in the spring, and that they had made their way. The pyramid makers had come from the Middle East down through South and Central America, and by the time they got to the United States, they were the mound makers. And then they were tired. They couldn't make the full pyramids anymore. They just made the mounds.
So they settled with mounds.
They
Wow. Yeah.
and they and they brought that figure with them all the way from the Middle East and then left it there. And this guy was obviously
That's like proto internet conspiracy theory type stuff.
that's exactly it. The story for me, the Cardiff Giant, was an obsessive project for me because a lot of my projects are borderline obsessive. But that one, conspiratorial thinking, is naturally obsessive. And so I sort of tried to link as much material as I could and chart it out. And it gets pretty crazy what happened around the Cardiff Giant. I mean, this is only the tip of the iceberg, but we live now in a conspiratory. I mean, we were talking about narrative before, and conspiracy is really a great form of contemporary narrative and systems. And that's really interesting to me, that the internet was meant to be this vast fountain of information. I mean, I grew up with like World Book Encyclopedia. If you had the whole thing, it was a miracle. Most families only had a few because you had to order, sequence or something. And so we'd have one really ancient encyclopedia that was covered with dust. And then, anyway,
But everybody has the same information. Everybody has the same encyclopedia, right?
well, there was the Britannica, and then there was a couple of World Book and different things that I remember. But essentially, what I'm saying is that we had yeah, it could be the same, like what you're saying is agreed upon reality, maybe is what you're
Yeah.
suggesting. Yeah, you're right. It's an agreed upon reality. And then on the internet, even though we should have, and this is a whole nother story, we should have more information now than ever. Personally, I think it's been throttled down like hell. I don't really even look on there specifically for that much information anymore. But that's a different story. Conspiracy has replaced the monolithic news culture, for better or worse. I mean, in the beginning, I guess, yeah, oh, that was going to be good. And then at a certain point where everybody's an expert, except that they're really not. And that's post-truth, man. That's where we are right now.
It's incredibly weird. Back to the Cardiff Giant. Basically, that starts with an idea, and then you have this idea in your mind while you're working on the project, while you're researching. Do you think about how you might fabricate an object or a video
Oh, yeah.
or
Yeah, I mean, I made the giant in different ways. Did a big project. I mean, people can check it out on my website, which I try to put as much stuff on there as possible. So I did a project in Winterthur, Switzerland, around the Cardiff Giant. Also one in Boca Raton at the museum. The bigger version was in Switzerland, and there were like 5 or 6 rooms with pretty big installations in it. And so, one of the things was, how do you represent deep time and evolution? So I worked on this sort of spiral, a large spiral object with my architect friend, Adam Bandler, which they fabricated. By the way, I think we were talking about this before with materials. Since nobody can ship anything anymore, it's so expensive, it turns out to be more economical to build things on the spot wherever you're going to work and to ship as little as possible. So I've been working with models here, virtual things, and then sending the plans and having things built elsewhere if they can pull it off. It's kind of an interesting moment because you've got actual fabrication is cheaper than shipping, which is crazy town. So anyway, yeah, I made a spiral which I projected on, which represents deep time and kind of equating that with these kids who do that kind of spinning in the cars, getting in a parking lot and spinning the car around.
Like a donut.
Yeah, like what is that called?
Drifting. Yes.
Drifting. Yeah.
Yes.
So there's a lot of associative stuff in my work. The idea of winning the Darwin Award. Have you ever heard of the Darwin
Yeah.
Award? Yeah. And,
There's a lot that goes into it from a conceptual standpoint, but also from a material standpoint, how to make the actual object and how might it coalesce from an idea to an image or object. Do you have it in your mind as you research, as you go?
a lot of experimentation and and with the giant, I immediately thought, well, what if the giant was a shell, like, and there was back projection inside of it, this kind of lava lamp effect. So I fooled around with that, with the kind of resins, low toxicity resins, and made a model and figured out how to back project into it. And that worked pretty well. Ended up using 3D modeling on it, which was my favorite version. The one I made by eye. The other one that was used in Switzerland was made with a 3D print from the camera scan that I did from the actual Cardiff Giant. We back projected into this kind of translucent material, and the effect was just fantastic.
Amazing.
It worked quite well. And then I wanted to represent the pit. There's these great images of hoisting the giant from the pit. So I kind of project down into the pit these sort of anti-evolutionary cartoons, which I animated, which actually the band Devo was kind of inspired by this counter-evolutionary kind of comics that look a lot like Ray Pettibone or Mike Kelly or something. Wonderful stuff. So I like project that down into a pile of dirt so it has this sort of minimalist, and counter that with the giant.
We're getting to the final iteration. And there's scale models, there's mock-ups, there's digital renderings. So
Yeah.
it is indeed, as you say, a process of trial and error on an aesthetic level of figuring out what the right balance is.
Yeah, exactly. And then I wanted to do something related to chemtrails. I was trying to figure out how to do that in a gallery space, chemtrails, because there's something so fantastic about these marks in the sky and patterns that they make, and the fact that they're red. Why are they red as these offensive violations of the human form? And they believe that they're kind of re-terraforming the earth in certain ways. And so anyway, but formally, I used a scrim that Jim Shaw, my good friend Jim Shaw, I've known since forever.
The painter?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. He does a lot of sculpture and stuff too, and installation, and music. He's a polymath, that Jim, and a wonderful guy. But he was like talking about this scrim that he worked on. And I was like, oh, I need to try that. That's perfect for the chemtrail section of the chemtrail room. So I had a kind of machine elf Ezekiel's wheel spinning in the corner, and a chemtrail display. I just love the idea that people think that all those lines in the sky they're trying to change your mind, actually. But it makes some sense. People live in flyover zones or something, and they look up and they feel left out. They see, everybody's going on vacation. I'm just going to work, and I don't even have a job anymore. And there it is.
It's like a strange dystopian world on a lot of levels that we find ourselves in. We could certainly get into that more, but I want to just sort of clarify what I meant when I said that your work felt to me utopian. There is indeed this acknowledgement of the dystopian quality, the paranoia, the fear, and the darker qualities of the collective consciousness. On a deeper level, the fact that it can be expressed is incredibly healthy, and that your work exists to me is just astounding that it's possible.
Well, that's very kind of you. I try not to be preachy and I try not to be judgmental and I try to celebrate the humor and the creativity. And I also don't really like art that tells people what to do. I really don't like that kind of art because I think people are smart enough to know, make their own decisions. And so the coding and decoding of art, I think, is, a very special place that people have in the culture. And it's not to be abused, like wall texts and criticism that kind of deconstruct and demystify the work in different ways. It's too bad. And that expands more into the marketplace where people superimpose dollar figures on things and just eats into the dream space. And the dream space is smaller and smaller as we go along. They're stuck to their phone, something like I read a statistic. I mean, it's like something crazy, like screen time is up to 7 hours a day. That's pretty freaky. I mean, people like Jonathan Daschle, who wrote the storytelling animal, that's a kind of evolutionary narrative guy, talks about how that's part of the dream space. But I think it's more that's an optimistic perspective. I think a lot of what's happening is that there's a difference between nullification and kind of and engagement, and artists know what that is. But
I feel like there's a real hijacking of attention. My hope is that we'll see it someday the same way we look at smoking now. Like people became sort of ashamed of it at some point. You go outside and do it.
yeah, that's funny. I love that. Yeah, yeah. That's like there was somebody say the other day, sitting is the new smoking.
Maybe a few new smoking. Maybe sitting on your phone is like the ultimate new smoking. Just sitting there on your phone. What are you doing for 7 hours though?
Right.
They're incredibly intelligent people that have devoted their lives to capturing your attention. So the user is you can't quite blame them completely because it's
No.
just we all do it. You forget what you were going to look up initially, and you've been on the phone for 5 minutes, and you're like, what was I even doing?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, that's also human, so that's okay. I mean, I don't think people need to be productive all the time or something, but I just think that people are missing out on creative process. And I think can be creative. Something that the older I get, the more interested I am in how people who don't think of themselves as artists are creative. The membranes between these worlds can dissolve. And early on, I saw that in inventions, kind of fascinated with these sort of unsung heroes like Philo T. Farnsworth, who invented the electronic television in many of the primary patents there. And, he grew up on a farm, I think in Iowa. He was inspired by the rows of corns and transcribed that into like electrons on a phosphoring screen. He and his wife blew glass tubes for the first TVs, came up with that. It's like the level of creativity and these ingenuity there is just fantastic, inspirational.
There's so much you could do if you concentrate the mind. There's a monastery in New Hampshire that I go to sometimes. It's in the Thai forest tradition. And there was a monk that came through last year. It's a whole long way. We'll get into the whole story, but he was supposedly enlightened. That all the other monks were like, "Yeah, this guy, he's not coming back." I couldn't tell. I mean, he was just sitting there, kind of looking at his hands, and he gave a little talk, but he was talking about electricity, and he was saying the mind is like electricity. It's not bad or good. It's extremely powerful, but it depends on how it's used. If you concentrate it in a certain way, it can be beneficial to yourself and others. But if it's abused or if it's used for ill purposes, then of course it's powerful in that way too.
It's a good one. So you meditate?
I do. Are you a meditator?
No, but I wish I was.
It's never too late.
Yeah. I mean, don't you think a lot of artists probably go into these different states in different ways? I mean, right? I mean, you get
You
there
do.
painting or sculpting or daydreaming, but I suppose the goal of meditation would be to empty out in a sense, or how would you phrase it?
You almost do inadvertently become a little emptier or a little clearer in the mind just through the process of doing it. It is definitely in this way, like the retreats that I've done, the 10-day retreats, the silent retreats, I see them as really a purification. I mean, it sucks, man. It's painful. It's the hardest thing because you're so used to having all this stimuli. You're meditating the whole time. There's nothing to read. There's nothing to, you end up just reading like the back of the shampoo bottle like 1,500 times because there's nothing else to read, just whatever it is, anything. You want to consume and you're
Glycol,
observing, you're
yeah,
observing.
phosphine, glycol.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
You just want to, there's nothing to consume in that way, and so you just think about these things keeps ruminating over and over in your mind. But I think what you really do is create a kind of an awareness
mm, yeah,
and you're
empty is
just,
the wrong term. I meant to say
yeah,
something else.
no, but it is, I've gotten there just, as a sort of side effect, it can become, everything's so tricky because everything can become seductive. And then you have these incredibly transcendent experiences and you sort of chase those. Now you're off doing that. Now you're chasing an experience. You've kind of gone the wrong direction. You want to decrease your craving and decrease your attachment and increase your awareness of the moment. I mean, really, at any given moment, there's so much going on if you're really aware. There's the temperature, the feeling of the temperature in your skin, maybe a slight breeze, or the feeling of the cloth, the feeling of your hat, glasses, whatever it is on your face. There's
Yeah.
your breath going in and out, and all this stuff. So much things that are happening that we're just only subconsciously aware of. It helped a lot with my work in the studio of just being able to focus.
Did you figure out what to do with that? How to make that frame?
Oh, that frame. No, I never. I think I have to figure out how to make it in Rhino or some other three. You must have this all the time where you have an object in mind or a piece in mind, and you're not sure how to make it.
Yeah. I'm working on a version of the Giant now that is going to be stone or approximated stone, but it has to be kind of lightweight. And for the Hirschhorn, there's a project I'm doing in the garden there. And so, yeah, it's just a process, I'm looking for people who can do it and what kind of lightweight concrete that could look like stone or could be outside without corroding and like that. But yeah, did you try putting your painting into Chat GPT and say, give me a 3D model of that?
Oh no, that's a good idea.
Because
Yeah.
I mean, they keep talking about how, oh yeah, you don't need to program anymore and you don't need coders anymore. We can code it for you, but I don't know whether they can actually do much of anything yet for us. But
I'm curious. Yeah, I wanted to talk to you about AI. When I saw you at the warehouse, you were showing me some videos that you were coming up with. Were
yeah.
you using GPT for those?
Oh, no, I was using this program called Pika just because I haven't been able to find any recommendation for another program that was any better or worse or whatever. I think there's probably better ones, but they're more expensive. And I got some pretty good results from Pika. It's just very small percentage are usable in some way. Even even when I love the hallucinations.
In your hands, for example, that's an incredibly powerful tool that can be used because you know what you're looking for. I think in the hands of a non-artist or somebody that just hasn't studied art or aesthetics or anything like that, you might be able to make some interesting things and they have a good time. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think for the most part, it's going to generate slop, AI slop.
Yeah, and it's drifted in that direction. I noticed. I mean, I don't even want to talk about it too much, but like they keep changing the program, I'm sure, and probably their models because there's so much money going into this world. But I don't see what people would be paying for. Like, I'm not going to pay like millions of dollars for a 10-second animation. So there's all these gearheads out there for financial freaks looking at the gold rush, but I think we're gonna, as you probably have already figured out, the bubble's gonna burst when they figure out what they actually have. Maybe we'll be pleasantly surprised. To this day, I still can't figure out how Mark Zuckerberg made all that money. Just makes no sense to me
That's a
whatsoever.
very good question. Is it
No
ads? Is it
sense,
must
man.
be ads, I guess.
That's what
Yeah.
they say, but I think it was like some kind of giant spy system. Like what they were really doing was, they say ads, but what they were doing was gathering the complete data set. Do you ever read that book, Surveillance Capitalism?
No.
It's pretty good. It's about the tech world and what they were really doing, trying to get all the info to know.
It's a kind of a creepy place, the tech world. I don't know, but we also benefit from it too, like all these programs. And if you use again, back to technology being a very useful tool in the right hands, I think it can be used for good. And I think, well, just as a small example, I was able to fix my car using AI.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I'd never done any mechanical work before, and I found out exactly what part I needed and opened up the engine and figured out how to do it within.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, I was like extremely surprised, and I didn't think it was going to work. I was like, I've never actually. I had to like take the engine off, like the top of the engine off, and put this like valve in there.
Oh,
That
no.
was yeah, it was great, and it worked, and I was astounded.
Can you do that for my heart right here?
Sure, you got a problem? Yeah, sure. I'm sure at some point somebody will be able to, right? Know exactly.
I just need a mirror above my table and a couple of X-Acto knives, and I can operate on myself.
That's it. Get you in ship shape in no time. So
Yeah.
what you were saying, you mentioned briefly just a second ago, I think you showed me as well, there was a project involving machine elves.
Oh, yeah. That's also being shown in Tokyo. There's a they kind of and it's up now in Shanghai. There's a version of it called Machine Crystal, and they did a beautiful job building it out. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to go, but the Tokyo piece it's at first the piece began at Lehman Mopen Gallery a couple of years back, and it's, I don't know, 10 or 11 dichroic wood plexi forms based on crystals. I became fascinated by crystals as a sort of launching pad for images and ideas, and thinking about high-tech culture. The crystals exist in timing devices and computer chips and so forth. They're basically the heartbeat of the computer and so forth. And on the other hand, they're kind of the carrier of all this sort of mythology of the new age culture and healing and this kind of thing. And so I like that both things exist in that object. And so I thought, what would happen if I kind of projected into crystals, and I researched the forms and cutting them out, and I had worked with dichroic. I don't know if you ever know what dichroic is.
No.
It's kind of that kind of candy colored reflection that you see in plexi or windows somewhere. Occasionally car paint uses, but it's fascinating stuff because it's really based on like the iridescence that you see in shells or
Or
something
like a
like.
puddle, right, of oil, that same kind of
A little
iridescence.
bit, yeah, yeah. And so I think you're kind of a material guy. You enjoy looking it up. And there are people who make it out of glass, which would be my dream, is to work with big pieces of glass. But it basically, there's a plastic substrate that's usually embedded in the glass actually, but you can cook it in a kiln or something like that, but they only make small pieces of it. Anyway, the crystals are made of dichroic. Dichroic splits the light in this wonderful way that's very strips out like different layers of coloration from it. So it gives it this iridescent quality and repeats the image in different ways. My contemplation there was really kind of around a lot of the ideas that we've been discussing. These machine elves were really, I mean, it wasn't really from the DMT experience, but I liked the idea that this kind of high tech chemistry of DMT, even though people argue that it's also, endogenous and so forth. I love this idea of this kind of notion that these creatures exist and maybe these chemicals that would have always been in our body can be used to connect to them and that they live in another dimension. And of course, I had to go right to that and kind of connect it to the traditional elf, which comes out of
Like the Western
Emerald Isles. And
the
yeah,
Western traditions, yes.
yeah, yeah. So I love connecting all this stuff. And then,
I think in your work, there's so many beautiful connections, then a lot of dichotomies, seemingly contradictory ideas happening at once. And with the machine elves, it makes me think about something that a lot of shamans call ayahuasca and call DMT. They refer to it as technology.
mm,
And it is a very incredibly powerful and ancient technology. You don't think of it as technology as such, but it really is. It's kind of a tool, a technology that you use,
yeah,
but at the same time, you're its tool. In a
yeah.
way, you know.
I really tried to get an interview with Hoffman in 1989 when I was doing something in Zurich, but he wasn't given an interview. I couldn't get through to him, but I really wanted to kind of interview him in relation to television and this idea of visions and this sort of interiorized vision and how he thought it played out because it like as you calling it a technology. I mean, I often think that yeah, like somebody can like anybody can become a mystic in a heartbeat, and that's whereas people used to meditate or they had to be struck in some various ways um, to have these visionary thoughts and it's part of what's happening. I mean, if you see the incredible level of designer drugs that are available now, I mean, it's shocking. And there's some kind of connection to AI with that too, which they're designing even more and more and more of them. So we're in new territory, man. They're doing things that I, I don't
It's a
know.
brave new world.
Yeah, they're kicking the can down the road with that.
Wow, yeah. So I think it's a world that's increasingly incomprehensible, or it's almost like a sci-fi future. What books, literature, media have influenced you?
Well, my friend Constance de Jong, she wrote Modern Love, Itilo, and we've collaborated over the years on performances and videos and different scripts and things and performances. And Tony Conrad, also good friend and inspirational figure. Of course, Mike Kelly. We didn't even bring up my old friend Kelly, who
Yeah, I wanted to ask. You guys studied together at Cal Arts, right?
that's right. And we had a band and also a kind of, I mean, it was a collaboration that was involved installation and art making, performance, all sorts of stuff. It was super open group. The Poetic.
Did you work together in New York as well?
Yeah, we did things in LA, New York, and we showed projects around all around. The Poetics project floated around quite a bit, and it's in the collection of the Pompidou. But but that's another story. But yeah, what kind of books, movies, and things?
I want to thank you again for that book. You gave me the Constance's book about Gandhi in South
Oh
Africa,
yeah,
based
yeah,
on the Philip Glass play that she wrote with Glass, right?
yeah, yeah. That's right. Satyagraha.
Satyagraha, yeah.
Yeah. Recently I've been working with Alice Coe, curator, and she did the wonderful project in Taiwan, which was themed around remote viewing. And I like to connect most recent books. I can't even think of what the most recent book is that
Do you
I've
read fiction, sci-fi?
sometimes, sometimes, I mean, Philip K. Dick. I mean, if you're talking lifetime of people who come up, it's Philip K. Dick, I think is great, great figure because he's got this blend of every man, every person, and also this kind of philosophy and humor. The three together, he's kind of a model for me. And William Burroughs, of course, for his cut up. And I love his stuff so much. Also, great, great sense of humor. I always thought Naked Lunch was there was a it was very humorous. When I first read it, I was shocked, younger guy, and I was like, yeah, that's it's so punk. It's so and but then later I read there was a great version that came out, some kind of anniversary. I don't know what it was, like 50-year anniversary of Naked Lunch. And it had an appendix in the back that was like 50 pages long about the construction of Naked Lunch, which was almost as interesting as Naked Lunch. Like the way it was censored, the way that it was put together, the way it was kept on these. I mean, this before anybody had any way of saving anything. So it was like if you had a manuscript, you had to keep it somewhere. And he was floating around, drugged out, debauchery all over the planet, writing this stuff. And the network of friends that helped him store the manuscript and then put it together and so forth. It's such a great story. I highly recommend it. But what else? I mean, I watch tons of movies, but yeah,
Yeah, we talked about Begonia,
loved it, man.
just a masterpiece.
So
Beautiful movie.
fantastic. Yeah,
Beautiful movie.
yeah. Of the moment, the leaps of faith and possibilities.
I thought of you as soon as I saw that.
Oh, that's so nice of you.
Just a beautiful. There's been a lot of great movies this year, though. One Battle After Another.
Did you think that that was a kind of Matt Barney spaceship sort of that they had going?
Yeah, yeah.
Like I thought about Matt Barney when that came up
I
as
didn't think of it, but I do now. I'll never not
you
think of it
know,
that way now.
pretty cool.
Yeah, that's great. That's good. Did you see it coming?
I sort of, as it went along, I mean, that actor, what's that guy's name, man? He is so good.
Jesse,
Ugh,
he's amazing.
that's like
That's
his best role.
there's this new era of movies in which they're hyper real. The acting is so good, you're utterly just convinced. And there's something changing. I can see that in film where it's beyond real. You see that in also movies like One Battle After Another. That's maybe a little more fantastical, but there's a level of engagement with, I guess, reality or even this collective consciousness or something. There's something really interesting happening in the film space right now.
Well, I'm curious to see Spielberg's new movie that's coming out related to the aliens and grays. Did you see the ad for
I
that?
heard about it. I didn't see it though. Yeah.
I mean, Whitney Strieber. Did you ever read any of his books?
No, I didn't.
Oh my God. All right. I'll recommend for you and your audience the book Communion, which is his firsthand accounts of aliens and and the movie Communion starring Christopher Walken, which if you haven't seen it, I leave you with that, my friend.
I'm gonna
As
read the book and then I'll watch the
it's gonna
movie.
be it's really that's the point when culture changed right there, the inflection point, because Communion, I think, was on the bestseller list of New York Times for quite a while. And there's some interesting connections to the art scene in Soho too, where there were certain artists involved in these groups that got together talking about experiencers. And anyway, the cultural salience of that project was, I think, it kind of led the way.
Wow. I'm there. I'm gonna read it. How about art? Are you looking at a lot of art these days, or what kind of stuff historically have you been into?
Um, let's see. I love the Man Ray show. Was incredible. My friend Pascal Rousseau has a big Hilma af Klint show up at the Grand Palais that I'm absolutely dying to see. The problem is I missed a lot of art recently because I've been busy and
Busy making art.
yeah, and that's painful for me because I really like to see it reorient myself. But anything and
I saw a few shows last weekend. I saw the Gothic architecture show at the Met, which is amazing. It's really, really good. It's beautiful. I did see the Raphael show too, just because I felt like I had to, but I went on a Sunday and it was just painful. Just pain. You couldn't even see it. I breezed through because I mean, you're like bumping into people every two
I
steps. You could,
heard that it was so jammed. These friends of mine were here from Spain, and they were just like outraged at how crowded it
it was
was.
insane. It was insane. It was pandemonium. I'm just like, I can't handle this. It was too much. It was too much. Then my friend and I we saw those two shows. We saw Carol Beauvais at the Guggenheim. It's lovely. That's a little more easygoing. Not very crowded. He hadn't been to the Guggenheim before. He was from out of town. So he was really into just being in the space. And then we went to the Frick and always loved to see the classics, you know.
I'll tell you, I saw a fantastic. I love the new museum show that's up
Ah, I
now.
didn't see it.
I highly recommend that. It's a great, great show. And speaking of the connection, I also was out in Santa Fe and I saw the Santa Fe Biennial, which I thought was astounding a while ago. Great, great show. If you see that online.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think there's really good shows coming around. I know the Morgan is going to have a tarot
Oh, cool.
exhibition
Oh, I love the
this
Morgan.
summer. Yeah, I'm really psyched to see that.
I'll go
Like,
see that. Yeah,
yeah,
for sure. For sure. And you saw the Whitney Biennial?
the Whitney Biennial. Yeah, yeah, some good stuff in there.
Yeah, the piece in the first floor. I don't know. I remember who's by. You remember that there's like a room when you go in there and it's like a weird AI hell.
Oh yeah, 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 yeah.
There's a museum guard sitting there and just looking like he was just in pain. And I'm just like, he has to sit inside that room all day. He had headphones on. I'm just like, oh my God. Oh boy, it's crazy. Tony, well, I don't want to
That,
keep you. I know you've got work to
well,
do.
let's keep it going, man. Next time I'll see you, later in the summer or something. Let's get a cool drink.
Yeah, have a great trip, man. Yeah, I want to hear about it when you get back. Let's hang.
Okay. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for doing it. All right, we'll talk to you soon.